Okay, so let's talk about transformations. Transformations are whether or not we're going to move our graph up and down, left and right, make it fat or skinny, and we need to use proper terminology. So, f of x is always our starting equation. Okay. Depending on what we do to this is going to determine how we transform our graph. Anytime I just take my equation and I add a number to it, we'll just say 1, this is going to move my graph up and down. This happens to go up 1, okay? The graph moving up and down is the y-axis. Moving left to right is going to be my x. So this is a transformation on the y-axis. I moved it up 1. If I was going to move it down, I would take my original function minus 1. Okay, this would move it down 1. Let's move our graph left to right. So a lot of times you've heard me say, step inside to move side to side. Side to side is the x. That means the x-axis. This is what I have to manipulate, is the x. We're going to do a horizontal shift left or right. Here is my x. Okay, it's always opposite the sign. So if I want to move this thing to the right, I would go -1. Okay, this is going to go right 1. Remember, y is just a fancy f of x, okay? That's why these were going up and down. That's just a fancy y. All right, let's move this thing to the left. Okay, so I got to step inside and move side to side. Plus, it's on the x, so I have to change my x. X plus 1 makes my graph go left 1. It's always the opposite direction of the sign. Now, let's talk about making our graph fat or skinny. So a quick way we've talked about that is a vertical stretch. Looks like Victoria's Secret, okay? So skinny. Think of skinny. The same thing would be a horizontal compression. Those are both going to be skinny. They're not going to look the same when we use this, so let's talk about it. Vertical up and down is the y. So here's my fancy y, and if I'm going to do something to this to make it skinny, it has to be a whole number. That whole number has to be here. Okay, so this is a vertical stretch. Now, I can do the same thing to my graph, but to make it a horizontal compression, horizontal goes left to right, which means I have to mess with the x. So inside here, I'm going to multiply my x. This becomes a horizontal compression. These two do the same thing. Now, the last one that we have not done, vertical chunky, which makes my graph fat. And then that would also be a horizontal stretch. These are going to make my graphs fat. They are going to look different. One has to manipulate the y, one has to manipulate the x. Fractions are fat. Fractions and fat go together. Okay? So, vertical is the y. What's the y? It's a fancy f of x. So, if I want to make this thing fat, I need to throw a fraction in the front. This becomes vertical compression. Now, if I want to make this fat and make it a horizontal stretch, horizontal left to right, I have to change my x. That means I have to step inside where my x is at and change it to a fraction inside of here. This is a horizontal stretch.